All right. Hello and welcome. I'm Sean Walter, and I am the author of the book Tales in Somber Tones. The book is a short story collection that myself and the artist Karen Ruffles started putting together over 2 years ago now, and have been working on turning into an inclusive modern art and literature project. We had originally planned a live touring show starting in the UK with access materials, readings, physical 3D prints of the artwork that was designed to be experienced by touch, but due to literally everything, we've done our best to move to a live streamed version. And that brings us to today. Today I'll be reading 3 stories, taking a short break, and returning to read 3 more with the help of our sign language interpreters, and with Karen ready to answer any questions made in the comments below. A short note on captions. YouTube does not allow live captions for us at this point, but after the video is uploaded and trimmed, the captions will be available. That'll take about a day. As for the images, I'll be reading an image description to aid those with low vision prior to each story. And now, on with the show. Our first story is titled Timber. The image is of a dead tree, viewed from below. What at first seems to be vines climbing the bark, on closer inspection, are old and fraying ropes. A broken noose dangles from a branch high on the right, and a grinning skull, embedded in the trunk, smiles down from the left. Gregor sat in the inn, warming himself by the fire. He watched as the flames danced in hues of orange and blue, with every passer-by and every opening of the door. After a time and several pints of stout, he began to fancy that he could see figures in the flame, creatures of heat and light, meeting here, drawn by the presence of their own kind. The flames danced, and someone sat in the chair opposite to Gregor. A few moments passed, then the newcomer cleared his throat. "Are you all right, boy?" came a rough, though not uncaring voice. Gregor looked up. Through the spots in his vision, he saw an old man sitting in his stocking feet, smiling at him. "I'm fine," he lied, and turned back to the fire. The old man took a sip from the cup he held in his lap. "You don't look fine," he started. "In fact, you look like hell." Gregor didn't look up. "It's been that kind of day," he said, relenting. The old man nodded, tugging at the straggly gray strands of hair hanging from his chin. "I know what you need," he said, snapping his fingers. "You need a story. Something to take your mind off your troubles." He took a handful of coal from nearby and threw it into the fire, where it broke, sputtered, and finally caught. "What's more," the old man continued, "you need a true story." He watched the fire burn for a moment, then took a sip out of his drink, and turned again to Gregor. "Do you know why we only burn coal in this town?" he asked. Gregor stirred uncomfortably in his seat. The old man's voice had a taunting quality about it. It carried with it a note of teasing and gloating, as if the knowledge the old man possessed was as simple and as important as the color of the sky or the movement of water, and the fact that Gregor could possibly not know was something to be rightfully ridiculed. He turned to the old man. "No," he said, annoyed. The old man's smile broadened in a way that seemed to mock Gregor's mood. He signaled to the barmaid to bring him another drink, then put his feet up on the footstool, and, when he was comfortable, he began. "You wouldn't think it from the looks of this town, but it is ancient in the extreme. Lots of the buildings have been torn down to be used as the blocks for others, only for those to be torn down in turn. But the town as a whole has been here, in one form or another, for thousands of years. And yet, old as it is, the trees that stand not 100 feet from here is older. One might even say that this town is here because of that tree. The old man paused to take a long pull from his antique clay mug, then continued. It's said that, long ago, a great battle took place here. Some stories say it was men in iron with swords, others say they had only leather and bronze, and some say it was just animal skins and clubs. But however it was fought, one thing is certain. It was an absolute bloodbath. By the end, neither side of the conflict could claim victory, and the survivors buried the bodies where they fell. And so, whether from a lack of troops or due to the horrors of that battle, a peace was reached. To commemorate that peace and to honor the dead, a tree was planted where the fighting was thickest. As time went by and as the tree grew, it carried the bodies and the bones of the fallen with it, blending them into its bark and branches. Both sides of the conflicts had a severe respect for their fighting dead, and their shared customs demanded that the resting place for them, wherever it was, be guarded from those who would desecrate them. There was only one problem. One skeleton looks much like another, and neither side could say whose dead was whose. So another agreement was made. 2 buildings would be made of stone, each housing the priests from their respective side, who would care for the grounds and for the tree that made up the site of the battle. Now, the people in those cottages couldn't farm the land for fear of disrupting their buried dead, so all food was shipped into them on carts. Naturally, the area soon became a hub of trade, because where you have men with goods and carts, money follows. The trade post became an inn. The inn required a bar. The bar required a brewery. And before long, the tree had its own town. Of course, time takes its toll on everything, even old traditions and customs, and the battle, the warriors, and the bodies which make up the foundations of this town were eventually forgotten. New rulers came and took possession of the town, only to lose it to another in the next war that came through, who lost it in the war after that. Indeed, the town was built on death, and seemed to attract it like a lover. People began to whisper that it was cursed, until some high king or lord came and made this place his home. A castle was built, though some say it was a keep, and others a simple hunting lodge. What is agreed is that this ruler kept power with an iron fist, and that the lawlessness that sprang up through changing hands so often would not be tolerated. To this end, an execution square was built around the once holy site, and that giant of a tree, with its many thick boughs and sturdy roots, would be used as a gallows. The old man paused, looking into his empty mug. Gregor was no longer staring into the fire. Instead, he found himself enveloped by the tale of the city he had always called home. The old man bellowed for another drink, and Gregor asked him what it was he was drinking. "Oh, you wouldn't like it," he said. "It's an old concoction, and tastes change with time. But where was I? Ah, yes, the gallows." Those were dark days for this town. The ruler oversaw each execution personally, delighting in the dance macabre. Some of the town's population fled, others hid, but many, many more were put to death on those strong limbs. The Lord's favorite way to execute someone, by all accounts, was to place their ankles on an anvil and to strike each of them 3 times with a smith's hammer. Then he would let the noose hang low. So low, in fact, that the hanged person's feet could touch the ground, if only they could find purchase on their shattered bones. Those who were still alive after an hour of agony were rewarded by having their bellies split open. Some of the people of the town, poor and in need, began to steal the belongings of the dying as they hung there and struggled for breath. Even a man's shoes weren't safe. He took a long pull of his newly arrived drink before he continued. It's said that it was during its time as a gallows that the tree took on the appearance that it still holds today, twisted, black, and seemingly devoid of life. Of course, rulers who keep power through death and intimidation tend to meet an unkind end, and it was the same with this one. The townspeople rebelled, the ruler's own soldiers and guards turned on him, and even as he protested and screamed, they hung him from that ghastly tree. When he didn't die quickly enough, they cut him down, smashed and severed his limbs, and, to stop the screaming, finally slit his throat. The ruler's body was sent away, and it is said to have been thrown into a lake, and for the first time since its founding, there was peace in the town. But people are foolish, and after only a few decades, new fights began. The Renaissance had come to the town, and with it came new ways of killing one another. Suddenly things which were only the fever dreams of the deranged were made into weapons of war for the masses. And though much of the continent had an explosion of science and morality, the people of this town in their houses of stone only discovered that death could now come cheaply. Families began to build power for themselves and their bloodline, and through guile and deceit formed petty kingdoms within the town where their word was law. The town itself became divided in 3 as the people chose sides in the upcoming conflict. The situation was coming to a head. Small-scale battles were breaking out everywhere, so nobody took notice of the single traveler who came into town. Some people say he had boils upon his skin when he arrived, and others say he looked as plain as anyone. He got drunk in this very inn, then went and fell asleep under the tree in the square. As he slept, another skirmish erupted from the feuding families and spilled into the square. Whether it was pistol, rapier, or pike, nobody can say. But somehow the stranger was killed as he slept against that tree. His body was pierced right through and pinned to the trunk. The people said that the tree itself bled from the wounds inflicted upon it. After the stranger was buried, people began to notice their own skin boil. The plague had come to town. The old man paused, staring into his cup. When he began once more, his tone was colder. It's strange when a once bustling town becomes a ghost of itself, when whole districts go quiet and still as death takes hold. Nobody was safe. The plague killed the old and young, the rich and poor alike. The families in power forgot their feuds as their numbers dwindled, but that didn't save them. In the end, only 1 in 10 survived the Black Death in this town. In the years that followed, life seemed to suddenly be worth more. The old ways were dying without the population to support them, and people took solace in newer religions. The priests who had cared for these trees since time immemorial were wiped out, and all that was left was the discomfort of tradition when people began to dig up the old warriors' bones to till the soil and plant their crops or expand their homes. But even if most of the graves had been disturbed, most of the honored dead desecrated, they still would not cut the wood here, lest it hold the vengeance of centuries of the dead at its core. The old man bowed in his chair, his bones popping and creaking with a dull, hollow tone. Wars came and went after that, but that's another story. And one story was, I think, more than you bargained for, he said, smiling. The fire had grown low in the telling of the tale, and the hour had grown late. Gregor thanked the old man for the story, then left the warmth of the pub and entered the blood-chilling cold of winter. He turned up his collar to the wind and pulled a cigarette from his pocket. He closed his eyes to the blinding flame as he lit it and took a lungful of smoke. He breathed it out again as he looked at the ancient hanging tree, dead to its core, and he wondered if it had ever been alive at all, or if it had simply survived off the doomed residents of the town since it was planted, keeping enough of them alive to sustain it in times of need. He walked up to the trunk, staring into the branches and bark, wondering if the dead that time had forgotten were watching him in return. He looked over the vines that snaked up this wooden corpse like the remnants of every rope that had ever been used to hang the condemned, and maybe, he thought, they were what they seemed. He took another drag on his cigarette and exhaled, watching the smoke float up through the branches and pass by the oddly comforting shape of a noose that he had tied to a sturdy branch hours before. He sighed, then smiled. He was about to dash out the embers of his cigarette on the trunk of the tree, but halted. Instead, he lifted his boot and put it out on his heel, then turned and walked away. Looking back over his shoulder, he could have sworn he saw the old man grinning at him from somewhere in the bark. And then, that could have been his imagination. All right. Our next story is To Catch a Kelpie. The illustration is of an empty horse's bridle hanging from its straps. The shadow of the bridle lends an almost lonely tone to the image. Below the bridle is a pile of horse teeth. It was a pleasant day for a walk. That is to say, as pleasant as a day can get in springtime in the valley in Scotland. It was raining, which was to be expected, but the sun was out, which was not. Molly walked along the river that twisted and turned its way along the valley floor, etching itself into slate and rocky soil, through nothing more than stubborn determination. Molly generally approved of rivers. Others living in the nearby village said they were dangerous, that they attracted beasts and flooded without warning. But Molly had lived near to this river all her life, and the only beasts she'd ever seen were a sickly wolf and a deer. Animals didn't tend to venture too close to the village. They had learned better. But it would seem not all of them. Up ahead, a horse splashed along in the shallows, kicking up great sprays of water and running through them. It whinnied and played, and Molly watched, fascinated. She had never owned a horse. Her family had been poor when they were alive, and they were poorer still now that sickness had claimed most of them. The remaining members lived far from the village, if they still lived at all. The horse stopped, having spotted Molly staring at it. She took a step forward, and the horse immediately bolted away down the shoreline. Molly sighed, disenchanted, and returned home. The sun was setting when she reached her empty hovel. She set to work on her evening meal, boiling what vegetables were left in her larder. That night she dreamed of horses, of riding on their backs, the wind blowing through her hair as they wove through the forest trails. She had never known such speeds, nor such fun. The next morning, Molly skipped her chores and went back to the river, determined to experience her dream in reality. She reached the same spot she had seen the horse in less than an hour, but nothing was there today. Undeterred, she pressed on, further upstream. She'd never been this far from home before. The river's course led her into a small woodland, and a short time later she began to hear the roar of a waterfall. The forest parted, and ahead of her stood a great cliff face. The river fell from its source somewhere high in the mountains, and into a basin here in the woods, forming a large pool. But Molly hadn't noticed any of that. Her eyes were focused on the large creature standing just inside the pool. It looked like a horse in basic shape, but it was larger. Its long mane was speckled here and there with moss, and where most wild horses were afraid of humans, this one seemed calm and content. It looked at Molly, then walked forward off of the rocky shore and in reach of the grass nearby. It bent down and started eating, never taking its eye off of her. Molly carefully approached, taking each step as softly as she could so as not to startle the creature. It stopped eating and turned to face her, staring her straight in the eye. Why am I being so cautious? Molly thought. Standing up straight, she walked to the massive beast directly, and it did not retreat. It simply watched her, staring into her. Molly reached out to stroke its huge muzzle. She touched it, and her hand stayed in place as if glued to the creature's skin. She tried to pull away, but it was like she were pulling her own body, like they were fused. The great horse shook its head and nearly broke Molly's arm off. Slowly, carefully, it turned around and started walking, forcing Molly backward into the freezing pool. The water was past her shins. In a panic, she kicked at the creature with her simple shoes, but it moved on as if it hadn't noticed. The water was up to her stomach, and she screamed, trying to pull her own arm away from her body, to separate her skin and sinew by force and by will. The water was up to her neck, and she spotted something metallic under the beast's long mane. A bridle. She reached for it with her free hand, just as her head went underwater. No! The waterfall, so loud in the open air, sounded almost hollow from beneath the water. Molly opened her eyes in the murky liquid. The creature had stopped walking. She looked above her. The open air was only a few inches away, but she was still stuck fast to the creature's muzzle. Her lungs ached. She turned the creature's head using the hand that held the bridle, and the creature allowed its head to be moved. She tried pushing it backward, forcing it out of the water, but she had no leverage here, nothing to brace herself on. Her body cried out for air. Move, damn you! She thought in frustration, and the creature turned and began walking out of the water. Molly breached into the open air with a gasp, taking great gulps of breath. The creature kept walking out of the pool and onto the shore, dragging Molly along as she coughed and sputtered. She pushed on the bridle, and the creature stopped. Let me go. The voice entered her mind, uninvited and unwelcome. The creature stared at Molly. Is that you? She asked. Let me go, the voice repeated. Give me back my hand, Molly demanded, and suddenly her hand was free. She pulled it away and let it hang at her side, her shoulder protesting every movement. She looked at the bridle in her other hand, and something occurred to her. You have to do as I say while I'm holding on to this, don't you? The creature stared at her, but didn't respond. All right, Molly said, pondering. Back up 3 steps. The creature backed away, and Molly followed pace. She laughed. Very well then, listen to me. You are never to harm me, ever again. Is that understood? Yes. And you will obey that command? Yes. Good. Now, she looked around for a rock she could use as a stepping stone. Something else I need from you. It was sunset when she returned home. She sat atop the creature, riding far forward to avoid letting go of the bridle, but Molly was smiling. It had been better than it was in her dreams. The creature never seemed to tire, and it reached speeds a normal horse would never be able to match. They had ridden for hours, visiting places Molly had only ever heard of. A thought struck her. What will happen when I let go of the bridle? I will leave and return to the river, the creature replied. To try to find others to kill? Yes. And what if I command you not to leave? Will you have to stay? The creature didn't answer, and Molly smiled. It is so ordered, then. When I let go of your bridle, you will stay exactly where you are until I come back for you again. The creature shook its head in annoyance. Will you do as I command? Molly asked. Yes. Good. She let go of the bridle and slid down off the creature's back, rolling when she hit the ground. She stood up and looked to make sure it hadn't run off. But there it was, staring at her with its massive eyes, as if bored and frustrated and humiliated. Molly backed into her hovel, keeping the creature in sight. Before she closed the door, she smiled at the creature. Good night, she said, sweetly. The creature glared as Molly shut the door. The next day, Molly awoke and rushed outside. The creature still stood where she had left it, and it had eaten a circle in the grass around itself. The bare patch of earth was slowly turning to mud in the rain. Ah, Molly said, having the good sense to look ashamed. Sorry, I forgot you might want to eat. The creature rolled its eyes. They spent that day plowing the area around Molly's hovel in preparation for planting. The great strength of the creature made quick work of the soil, and with its help she was able to plant enough that season to sell excess crops to the village. Before long, rumors started to spread about the strange woman who lived near the river, and of her hulking giant of a horse. The rumors turned cruel when someone overheard her speaking to it. She's a witch, they would say. She enchanted her lover and he became the horse. That's why she's never seen without it. As the rumors spread, Molly went to the village less and less. Humans are strange, the creature said one evening. Molly had given it free rein at night to do as it pleased, so long as it would be in front of her door every morning. Some nights it chose to stay and keep her company. Yes, we are, Molly admitted. Let me go. Perhaps you can still salvage your reputation. Molly looked out of her door at the creature standing there. Though it had been years since they met, it hadn't grown a day older, and it had lost none of its ire in all that time, even refusing to take a name, saying that names were human things, and thus not to be trusted. I can't, Molly replied. Who would I talk to if I did?" She smiled at the creature, and she thought it was pleased. Time passed. Every few years, someone from the village would risk visiting the witch to know things that they shouldn't know about lovers, or about trade items from neighboring towns, or to ask revenge on someone who had wronged them. And in that way, Molly found purpose. The creature knew things that no human could possibly know, and was formidable when allowed to be. And on more than one occasion, she asked its help in dealing with what she called local problems. In her twilight years, Molly had become part of the village legends, as much as the blacksmith who fathered 20 children, or the cow who bore only 2-headed calves. It became common to blame the witch of the river for bad happenings, and to thank her for random good fortune. Molly knew something was brewing in the village. It was only a matter of time before something big would happen, and she would get the blame. It was after a particularly fearsome season that she was proved correct. The drought had killed many of the crops that the village needed to survive, and when the rain finally did come, landslides destroyed several homes. It was even said that the coming war with the English was all due to the witch and her sorcery. And so they came one night, with torches and picks, with hoes and pitchforks, and burned the witch's hovel to the ground. They never found body nor bone of her or her beast in the ruins. And there were some who said that the witch had planned this all along, but by and large, they were certain that the deed was done. To this very day, every so often, travelers tell of the kindly old woman who offered to take them across the river on the back of her great horse, and how lucky they were to have found her. And every now and then, someone from the village will vanish for weeks, only for their battered body to wash up on the river's shore. All right. Our third story for you today is Unconscious Mistakes. The image is a piled up sheet, looking as if it were left there after a particularly rough night's sleep. The folds of the sheet seem to form a face, and it's staring at you. Sleep. The calm, relaxing tranquility. A cessation of function to rebuild, recharge, and decompress, and to dream. But to Frederick, sleep was just a prelude to terror. Every night, try as he might, he woke up screaming from a deep, deep slumber. He had taken to warning lovers and neighbors that it would happen, to not be alarmed at any shrieks they might hear in the night, and that it was something he was trying to fix. And indeed, he was trying to fix it. Dr. Stein sat behind his desk, looking at the proceedings with a kind of bemused grin. Frederick was lying on a sofa, watching a small silver ball roll back and forth in Dr. Smith's hand. She was saying something about listening to her voice, the tone, the timbre of it, but Frederick wasn't paying attention. He was too busy looking at her thumb. It was a bit mutilated, but it didn't appear to be from injury or mutation. The flesh was puckered, bearing prominent teeth marks all along the inside. Stress, Frederick thought, finally turning his attention back to the doctor's voice. When you wake up from the nightmare, you won't scream. What you will do is pay very close attention to your surroundings. Observe every minute detail so that we can further explore what it is that's terrifying you, she said, still rolling the silver ball back and forth. Frederick stared at it, trying to ignore Dr. Smith's thumb as he did. He found himself quite relaxed now. Something about her voice seemed soothing to his chaotic mind. "Is this really going to work?" he heard Dr. Stein ask, realizing for the first time that he had closed his eyes. "It will if he lets it," replied Dr. Smith. And then Frederick shuffled off into oblivion. He awoke to an overwhelming sense of cold. The air that wafted through the room felt to him like invisible icebergs, slowly grinding down his skin, exposing raw nerves. He opened his eyes and proceeded to panic. He couldn't move. He was seemingly frozen in place, as if his mind had awoken, but his body hadn't gotten the message. The doctors were talking to one another, but they sounded quiet, distant. "Should we wake him?" one asked. "Nah, let him sleep. He doesn't get enough as it is," the other replied. Frederick tried to force himself to move, but it was hopeless. His limbs were dead weight hanging from a lifeless torso. "Am I still asleep?" he thought, watching the doctor's banter. "Did I just forget to close my eyes?" Something in Dr. Smith's hand caught his eye. A small creature, no larger than a hamster, crawled out of her sleeve and gently began gnawing on her thumb. She scratched at it with her pointer finger, and it moved aside, and then went right back to work. It spotted Frederick in mid-chew, a tiny speck of flesh still hanging from its chin. It smiled at him. Books, giant medical tomes, began to work their way out of the bookshelf behind the doctors. First one, then another, then a third. It was as if something was pushing the volumes forward on the shelf. The creature in Dr. Smith's hand noticed and climbed back up her sleeve. The unseen something worked its way up the shelf. When it hit the wall, Frederick could almost make out its shape in the shifting plaster and paint, tunneling through from somewhere outside of reality. The doctors were oblivious, even when feet not unlike those of a man pressed themselves out of the wall and began walking against gravity, step by step. Frederick lost sight of it as it reached the ceiling. When it didn't reappear after several minutes, he breathed a mental sigh of relief. That was when something brushed against him from the wall behind the sofa. Frederick shifted his gaze to the extreme side, and there he saw it, claws embedded in stretched plaster and paint, blurred by the extremity of his peripheral vision. Something began to tear behind him, and for a moment he thought he heard it breathing. Dr. Stein gently shook Frederick by the shoulder, who immediately shot off the sofa and landed on the floor. He coughed and gasped, taking in air as if he hadn't breathed since falling asleep. "Did you see it?" he choked between breaths. But Dr. Stein only looked at him with confusion and concern, not fear. Frederick gathered his wits and stood up, unsure of what to say or how to begin. Dr. Stein smiled at him. "Time's up for this week," he said. "But I expect you to know how things go with your night terrors when I see you next." Dr. Smith walked forward and offered her hand to Frederick by way of goodbye, but he just stood there, staring at her thumb, and the fresh dot of blood drying in the draft. I'll see you next week," he said, and tried not to run as he hurried out the door. That night found him lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, once again unable to sleep. He tried counting sheep, picturing them jumping a small fence, one by one. When he had counted 300, he looked around inside his sleep-deprived world at all of the woolen-coated creatures standing around, surrounding him as he counted. He looked into their oblong irises, stared at 300 sets of them, all watching him as if demanding to know why they had been summoned. He opened his eyes. Sheep were definitely out. Hours passed. He tossed and turned and found he was unable to get comfortable. He thought about drinking a glass of warm milk, but there are some things even the most desperate of people will not do. Finally, the gray of dawn appeared outside his window, banishing the darkness by inches, and he finally felt comfortable. As drowsiness overtook him, he fell asleep. The next day was, to his delight, uninteresting. He didn't wake up screaming. He went to work, spent a lot of his time messing around at his computer, ate lunch, did virtually nothing afterward, and went home. He was beginning to think that he was having an uncharacteristically good day. "No, you're not," said the sheep, standing in his dining room. Frederick opened his eyes. It was morning, and the sun filtered in through his blinds, giving the room a soft light. "Damn," he thought, as he tried to move and found that he was unable to. He felt restrained, somehow. It was as if the blanket on top of him was made of lead and held him in place. Somewhere in the house, there grew a hissing. He watched the carpet get stretched and pulled as something crawled toward him from underneath, distorting the world as it moved. It slid across the floor, up his bed frame and along his blanket. It twisted and moved, forming a face in the cloth. It reached up with its clawed hands and grabbed at the stretched reality in front of it. Slowly it pulled, and as a tear formed, Frederick saw what it was that had been stalking him. And he remembered seeing it countless times before. Every night, when he woke, when the barriers between what was real and what was imagined were thinnest, his stalker would arrive from the other side, and he would scream, sending it scurrying back from whence it came. Every night. By the gods, how he wished that he could scream. Okay, so we're going to take a very short break. We'll probably be back in 5, possibly 10 minutes, and we'll see you guys shortly. Okay, and we're back. Our next story is titled Instinct. The image is of a wolf's paw print in the sand, partially filled with water. The moon is reflected almost perfectly in each tiny pool. It happened on accident. Luna was simply walking home one night after work, minding her own business, when the hair on the back of her neck stood on end. She walked faster down the narrow streets and corridors, unsure if she was simply letting her imagination run away with her. When she reached a blind corner, she went around it, ducked behind a hedgerow, and waited. A few moments passed. She was just beginning to feel a little silly when she saw it. It was massive. Patches of bristly fur stood out amongst the moonlight as it turned the corner, and with each step, great claws gripped and cut into the concrete. It alternated walking like a man and being down on all 4 limbs as it paused to sniff the air. Luna gasped when the creature turned and looked directly at her, hidden behind the hedgerow. It growled. deep and long, and she found herself frozen in place. Just as it seemed the beast was going to pounce, it turned. A man and his dog had rounded the corner. The tiny pug was barking at the beast, pulling its dumbfounded person forward against his will. Then the beast leapt. The pug continued to bark and snarl and bite at the beast as the beast ripped the man to pieces. Finally annoyed, the beast growled at the pug, who turned and ran. Luna came to her senses just as the beast began to feast. She ran as fast as she could, all the way to her flat a mile away. She turned and locked the door, latched the chain, and pressed her back against it. As soon as she caught her breath, she screamed. It was a week later when she began to see missing person flyers posted around town of the man she had seen eaten that she decided she wasn't crazy. She had seen that beast kill a man. A beast that could only have been a werewolf. But what could she do? Report it to the police and hope that they didn't lock her up? And how was it they didn't discover the man's body? Surely there must have been at least pieces left behind. Luna began to study up on werewolf lore, digging into the oldest references she could, trying to make sense of it all. She went to the spot where the man had been killed, but the whole area had been repaired and repainted. The neighbors said someone had struck an animal with their car, and that nothing but gore had remained of the poor creature. She had run out of ideas. Even if they think I'm crazy, she decided, I must tell the police what I've seen. The next day she woke up early to go to the police station. On the way, she stopped at a cafe and got a rather large cup of coffee, more to give her courage than energy. As she left the cafe into the brisk morning air, she saw something that caught her attention. It was the dead man's pug, and it was sitting under the table of a young man who was nose deep in a laptop. The dog growled at her when it noticed her standing there for too long, but went silent at a whisper from the man. He looked up at Luna and smiled. I'm sorry about him. He's been through a lot lately, and it's left him a bit leery of strangers. Luna stood there a moment too long, motionless, staring. Are you okay? The man asked. What? Luna stammered. You're just kinda standing there, staring at me. Are you okay? Oh! Sorry. Yeah, I'm fine. It's just been a long day. The man glanced at his laptop. It's 9 a.m., he said, flatly. I work nights? So, almost bedtime for me. The man stared back at her. Okay then. Well, good night? Right, sorry, I'll go. Nice meeting you. Likewise, the man smiled, managing to hide that he must think Luna's out of her mind. Luna walked back down the street in a daze, heading back toward her flat. She was halfway there when she stopped in her tracks. Shit, she thought, and ran back to the cafe. She got back just as the man was getting ready to leave. She ducked into a store entrance and peered around the corner, watching him. When he started to walk away, she followed. She felt obvious and pretentious, as if she were in a bad comedy and the whole world could see that she was following the handsome man with the dog, but nobody stopped her or asked her why she kept dodging behind parked cars, or why she couldn't seem to keep a steady walking pace. Finally, the man went into an apartment building, across the street from a disused, overgrown park surrounded by an iron fence. Luna stood outside for several minutes, wondering if she could go in after him, but she thought better of it. Somehow, walking into a stranger's apartment and accusing them of being a werewolf didn't seem to be a sensible plan. Besides, she thought, I don't know if he's a werewolf yet. She pulled out her phone and noted down the building's address, and then she went home to plan. Luna spent much of the next week sitting in the same cafe that she'd seen the man in, trying to manufacture a spontaneous meeting. She thought that if she could somehow sit down with him and get him to talk, that she might find something that would prove he was a wolf in man's clothing. He walked into the cafe after dark, just a few minutes before closing. She observed him, trying to notice anything odd about his movements, his mannerisms, but if there was anything odd about him, she couldn't see it. She walked over to him while he waited for his coffee. "Excuse me," she said, smiling. He turned to her. "Yes?" Then he pointed at her. "Oh, hey! Aren't you the weird woman who stared at you until you got uncomfortable the other day?" She finished for him. Yeah, that's me." He laughed. "That's not exactly how I would have put it," he said, smiling. "Are you feeling better?" Has he always had such a nice smile? She thought. Out loud, she said, "Oh, yeah, loads better, thank you." "Oh, good. Had me worried there for a moment." The barista delivered his coffee to him, thanked him, and left. "Well," he said, grabbing his coffee, "it was nice seeing you again. Luna," said Luna. "Really? Huh. Well, it was nice seeing you again, Luna." He nodded to her and held out his free hand. "My name is David." They shook. David was already headed out the door when Luna called after him. "I don't suppose you'd want to get dinner someplace?" she asked. David paused in the doorway. "What, now?" "Well, yeah, unless you're not hungry." David smiled. "I could eat a horse," he said, holding the door open for her. Luna really wished he hadn't put it quite like that. They went to a restaurant nearby and made small talk over their food. "Where's your little dog tonight?" Luna asked, stabbing a bit of broccoli with her fork. "Oh, he's at home. He doesn't like going out with me after dark for some reason," David replied, slicing into a rare cut of beef. Luna watched the blood pool on his plate, watched it ooze from the meat. Her memory flashed back to the man who died that night. "This steak is fantastic," David said, cutting another slice. "Would you like to try it?" Luna fought back the urge to vomit. No, thank you," she said, trying not to retch. "I recently became a vegetarian." "Really?" David popped the morsel of barely cooked flesh into his mouth. I'm sorry, I didn't know." He called the waiter over and asked for a small box. He then slid the meat into the box and closed it. "There," he said, smiling. "No sense in you being uncomfortable over dinner." Luna smiled. "So, what brought you to the cafe so late in the day?" she asked. "You're all sorts of nosy, aren't you?" David teased. "Well, I am out to dinner with an almost complete stranger." "Well, yeah, but it was your idea." Luna shrugged in response. David laughed. "I just never really seem to get much sleep, that's all. I have the most bizarre dreams all night long, and I wake up tired." "What kind of dreams?" Luna pressed. "Just random nonsense, really. Anyway, how's your dinner?" The rest of dinner went exceedingly well, and David offered to walk Luna home. They stood in front of her flat, holding hands. Thank you for inviting me out," David said, smiling. "But I could have paid my end." I invited you, remember? Next time you can invite me and then you can pay. Luna returned his smile. I don't know. I might be spoiled now. Free food and good company? I think I could get used to that. Luna pulled her hand away from his, pretending to be mad, then tried to slap him on the shoulder. David avoided her swing, caught her by the wrist, pulled her close, and kissed her. Luna pulled away first. Do you think that dog of yours can look after itself for the night? She asked, hopefully. I think he would understand, David whispered, and they both went into the flat together. They slept late, lying in each other's arms for what seemed like forever. Eventually, David got out of bed and got dressed. I think my dog will be quite angry with me when I get home, he said, pulling on his t-shirt. His head popped out the top, and he saw Luna stretching out on the bed with a yawn, still nude. Definitely worth it, though, he added. Luna threw a pillow at his head, and they laughed. I'll see you tonight? She asked. David stopped and thought for a moment. Maybe. I might be busy, but give me a call. Maybe I can cook for you if I'm free. They kissed their goodbyes, and he left. Luna took a nap. When she awoke, she took a shower and got dressed. It was already evening by the time she left the house. She went to the cafe for a sandwich and coffee, dreading work the next day. She pulled out her phone and was about to text David, but then she remembered that his place was only a couple blocks away, and decided she would surprise him, confront him with what she knew already, and tell him that she wanted to help him. The sun fell while she ate. She walked to David's apartment by lamplight, wondering if it were prudent, wondering if she was being a fool. She got to the building before she realized that she still had no idea which apartment was his. She thought of a plan to mess with him. She would stand across the street and call him, tell him to go to the window, and then wave at him. She could always excuse away how she knew where he lived. So she crossed the street, standing in front of an iron fence. The bushes beyond the fence were massive, and Luna wondered when the city would trim them. She pulled out her phone and called David. The phone rang, on, until it went to voicemail. Luna sighed and tried again. Again, it went to voicemail. She was just beginning to write him a text when she heard the snap of a branch behind her, and a low, guttural growl she'd only ever heard once before. The next day, David awoke in his own bed. He had fallen asleep early the night before, but the strange dreams and nightmares he always had meant that he was still exhausted. He sat up. A wet chewing noise was coming from under the bed. David rolled onto his stomach and peered over the edge of the bed to see his new pug delightedly chewing on somebody's arm. The dog pulled back and gave a tiny bark, its face covered in gore, and it wagged its tail. David followed the arm with his eyes until he spotted the head. He recognized her. Ugh, not again, he said, lying back on the bed and sighing. She seemed really nice. And then, yawning, David went back to sleep. Our next story is titled The Creature's Lament. The image is of a standing stone tomb, dirty and unkempt, with foggy grave markers behind it. Grass and weeds grow all around the tomb. The door is open, with nothing but darkness within. A broken chain lays in the doorway. Over the doorway, the family name for the tomb reads Frankenstein. My dear brother Ivan, I hope this letter finds you well. Do your studies proceed? I admit, the thought of you being so far from home fills me with dread, but we shall be here still when you return. As for me, I have a story to relate. The strangest occurrence preceded the dawn. In the night, I awoke to horrified shrieks coming from the stable. Thinking it thieves after my stud stock, I grabbed my rifle and ran out in my nightgown, ready to fire at anyone I came across. Reaching the stables, I threw the door open and thrust my torch into the darkness. The horses were all against the corner to my left, and, to my horror, my prize stud lay dead beneath the shod hooves of his colts. They trod on him still. Even as I tried to calm them, they pummeled him into the dirt, trying to climb the walls to get away from whatever was kneeling at the other end of the stable. The shrouded figure was layered in a thick greatcoat and had a strange hide over his shoulders and head. The man, for it must have been a man, was huddled over another figure in the darkness. I raised my rifle, but before I could issue my warnings, the figure spoke. You could do me no greater kindness than to end my wretched existence. His voice was as cold as the north winds, but gentle like the new dawn. The man's eloquent speech and shambled appearance confounded me, brother, and I stayed my hand from the judgment I was ready to administer. "Who are you?" I cried. "What are you doing here?" The man stood, unfolding his great and powerful body. He was a full 8 feet tall, but any detail in his face remained shrouded in the shadow of the hides he wore. Behind him lay a pile of rags that may have been a rucksack, or something more sinister. The giant rumbled, "I am lost. So very lost." "If you're lost, why didn't you come to the house?" I asked. The fright in my horses still worried me. "I would not be welcome in your or any house," he replied. The tone and timbre of his sad voice made me not question his resolve. I attempted to move closer to the man, if man he was, but he backed away and shouted, "Stay your place!" His words echoed in the stable like thunder in the hills. "Who are you?" I asked him when I regained my wits. "A coward, or nothing at all," he responded, quietly. "How could one such as you be a coward?" I balked at him. He motioned to the bundle I had mistaken for rags. "That was my father," he said. He followed me from Geneva into the cold wastes of the north, chasing me, wanting to destroy me. But the journey proved too much for his delicate and temperate frame. He expired among the sailors of a northern expedition vessel. The giant sighed. I couldn't even kill him myself. I hated him, and I loved him. I admired his brilliance, and I despised his disaffection. I am a coward." He hung his great head in shame in the shadows at the other end of the stable. "What wrong could your father have committed against you that you would want him dead?" I asked. I admit, this man intrigued me, brother. There was something otherworldly about him, something macabre and enchanting. "He created me, and he abandoned me," he replied. "He could not stand the sight of me." Then I thought I understood. His father had sired a bastard, a shame to his family, and would not claim him as his own. I felt pity for this man. I could not help it. "How is it that you came to have your father's body?" I pressed further, wondering at the corpse that must be even now decomposing under the rags. I had left the sailors behind, consigned and content with my fate among the frozen wastes. But, as I was drifting away, I heard a funeral dirge, and I knew they would soon be giving my father a burial at sea. I came back in time to see them thrust his lifeless husk overboard, and I dove into the chilled depths after him. He turned then to the rags. He deserves better, he finished, sadly. I eased my way closer to him, and in his grief and misery, he took no notice. He continued, I promised the captain of that ship that I would form my own pyre to throw myself upon, but I couldn't even do that. The wood refused to burn, a punishment for my cowardice. He didn't turn to me. I was finally close enough to cast a glare from my torch upon the body at the giant's feet, and it revealed him. The dead man was pale and sickly in appearance. His beard was full of ice and frozen dirt. I knelt down next to him to check for life, but no steam escaped his blue lips, and still the giant didn't stir. What will you do? I asked him, standing once again. I will bury him in hallowed ground, as a god deserves. And then? But what he may have said or done, I will never know, for at that moment he looked up from his personal reverie and turned towards the torch. His face, brother, was a patchwork of scars and old stitches. His arm flew with inhuman speed and struck the torch from my hand. At his sudden violence I fired my rifle, forgotten but ready. He screamed in rage. The torch landed in the hay nearby and began a blaze, driving the creature to further anger. He threw me, bodily, across the stable, and I must admit, brother, that I fell unconscious. I awoke to a holocaust. The giant and the body were gone, but as I left the stable I heard screams of anguish on the wind, and I knew one thing for certain. The creature was alive. He was most assuredly alive. I tried to track him this morning, but the snowfall obliterated any trace of his passing, save for the ruin of our stable and the loss of my prize stud. I hope London treats you well. Father sends his love, and Mother begs that I ask if you found anyone special in that strange city. For myself, I just hope that you've not encountered anything like the creature in your journey. Your loving brother, Mikhail. Dearest Mother, I have the most extraordinary tale. The ordeal ended not yet an hour ago, and my hands still tremble as I write this letter. May my soul hold out until I can finish it. By the gods, I cannot seem to catch my breath. Yesterday, as I completed my mail run to the authorities in the town of Rostock, I was told that I would have a passenger for my trip back to Hamburg. I should have seen the fear in the man, the anxiety in him, but the road had been harsh, the winter was cruel, and I admit I had taken more than my usual amount of gin to brace me from the cold, so I took no notice. I took my meal and listened to sailors in the pub. It seemed a newly arrived ship from Russia had been plagued by some sort of ghost, and 3 young men had been found dead without wounds. I thought nothing of it at the time. My passenger, it seemed, was a poor great beast of a man. How he managed to pay for his journey I know not, but my fee was waiting for me upon the mail desk when I prepared to leave an hour after my conversation. My passenger waited for me on a nearby bench, his large sack of possessions clutched in his great hands. I presented myself to him, informing him of the travel time to Hamburg and the conditions, and jesting that the cold had at least driven away the highwaymen that usually plagued this route, and had recently claimed the life of my partner. My passenger made no reply. I reached out to shake his hand, and he recoiled, as if I had offered the barrel of a rifle. He kept his great head covered, shaded from the light, in what looked as if it might once have been sailcloth, crudely stitched together with cord through roughly cut holes, and I began to wonder if this man had been a sailor who was abandoning his ship. Such occurrences are no rarity in Rostock, and a man of his bulk would certainly be worth his feed on a ship of war. I led the man out to the mail coach, offering to take his bundle and stow it with the rest of the large packages in the rear netting, and that's when he turned to me. "Mother, perhaps it was the light, perhaps it was the gin, but the look in his eyes seemed colder than the air around me." In a voice like hellfire, he told me that the sack would be riding next to him for the duration of the journey. His tone indicated that refusal was not an option, and seeing his hand upon the sack, I swear that it was larger than the breadth of my chest. Seeing no other option, I opened the door for the man, wondering if the springs would support him. The coach leaned and the tongue groaned as he centered himself within, but they held. Oh, how I wish that they had not. The sun was setting as we left Rostock, my fresh team of 6 anxious to be underway. We made good time despite the heavy cargo we carried. We made the first leg of the journey without incident. We changed horses and were once again underway, my passenger having no wish to relieve himself nor eat while we were stopped. I assumed that the master of his ship must have long arms if my passenger was this far from port and still unable to relax. But who am I to fault a man fleeing that press-ganged life of torment at sea? It was at least 8 hours into our journey when I started to hear something over the rushing wind, and through the stout scarf you knit me closed fast around my ears. It was a voice, it seemed to me. Curious, I slowed the horses to hear it better, carefully, easily, so as not to alarm my passenger. "Father," he had said, to whom I do not know, "why did you create me, if not to love me? What I have done to you I have done in rage, and it was less than that which you did to me. Nonetheless, I ask your forgiveness." If he continued speaking afterwards, I did not hear it, but a moment later I heard great sobs coming from the coach, sobs that threatened to rend my heart from my chest from the pain in them. And then he howled like a madman in the darkness, his grief fighting against and overpowering the wind. I drew my scarf closer to my ears to stifle the sound, and drove the team onward as fast as they would carry me into the darkness. A few hours later, a short distance from Hamburg, and as the sky was just beginning to lighten, I spotted a man up ahead in the fog and pre-dawn gloom. He raised a gloved hand from his riding cloak and hailed me. I admit my foolishness, but I was compelled to slow if only for the reassurance of another human being. My passenger had unnerved me so. As soon as I drew the team to a stop, the man reached into his cloak and presented a pistol. I cursed myself as he spoke his threats. 2 other men emerged from the side of the road and roughly escorted me off the coach, threatening to shoot me if I struggled. The man who had hailed me peered beyond the lanterns and into the compartment. "Get out of there," he demanded of my passenger, either not seeing the bulk of who he was addressing, or emboldened by his pistol. "I have no possessions for you," my passenger said, his voice as black as the darkness that enveloped him. "I wish only to continue my journey. Leave me in peace." "Are you deaf? I said get out of there!" The highwayman presented his pistol and reached into the coach to grab my passenger's sack of possessions. And that was his very last mistake. In a flash, a fist like a hand of God shot out from the darkness and struck the highwayman. I heard a loud, wet crack that must have been the man's chest, and, I fancied, his spine breaking in two. He fell backward to the ground, holding where he had been struck, gasping for air like a fish pulled from the sea. The other highwaymen began firing their pistols blindly into the darkness of the coach. I ran from the road into the safety of a nearby tree, and then I heard it. "Mother, I swear to you that this is true. I had consumed no spirits on the return journey, and though I had not slept, I swear it is no delusion." The passenger screamed, with a rage unlike any I have ever heard, and as I watched, the coach was lifted wholly into the air and thrown at the two remaining highwaymen as they looked on in shock. The force of the throw knocked my team of 6 to the ground. "Mother, that coach must have weighed over 200 stone, and the horses must have weighed 80 stone each. And yet my passenger treated it as if it were but a mild inconvenience." The mail coach crushed the two would-be thieves and shattered into kindling. The horses, mangled and shrieking, tried to run, dragging the bodies of those who could not stand and the remaining of the hitching equipment into the fog. I hid behind the tree, praying to the Almighty that my passenger might not see me and continue his wrath, and to my everlasting joy, a moment later, I heard him taking great steps toward Hamburg. "Mother, I am convinced that I have taken the devil himself as passenger. What other explanation could there be? God knows what would have happened to me if I had delivered this man with the mail coach. I have told no one else about this, and I will be leaving here tomorrow for Berlin. Nobody would believe what I have seen, and I cannot explain to them within reason what kind of accursed creature I had traveling with me, and that I have delivered into their midst. Do not think me mad, Mother, I beg you. I will write you again when I arrive in Berlin. Your loving son, Hans." February the 23rd, 1797. I have long worked in this graveyard. Its stones and monuments, the ghosts and wails of the dearly departed, are all old friends of mine. I have received many people attempting to steal the bodies of the freshly dead to sell to the men of medicine here in Geneva, and I have chased out those who failed to meet my price by the tip of my spade. Never in all my long years here have I ever seen the likes of what I saw tonight. The night began like any other. I sat down in my tiny cottage on the cemetery grounds to go through my treasures from the day's burials. A small silver brooch and 3 small gold rings. A tidy sum. I'm not proud of my actions journal, but I will not compound my damnation by lying about them. Yes, I steal from the dead. The dead have no need of their possessions, after all, and I have seen nothing to prove to me that they will come looking for them again. I was just preparing my evening meal when I heard the soft steps of someone in the yard. I thought it was another medical student, or one of the professors looking for a body for their studies, so I grabbed my spade and lantern and went out into the cold. At first, nothing appeared out of place. The gravestones and tombs made for a macabre scene, but to me this is home, and I feel at home among them. Still, something wasn't right. Perhaps it was the cold of the air, or the feeling of being watched, but chills ran down my spine. I called out to the darkness, "Who's there?" When no reply came, I ventured further into the cemetery. Sometimes body snatchers come with pick and spade of their own and attempt to take the dead without paying for them, and I can't have that. I went around to the freshly entombed to check on them, but none of them were disturbed, their doors securely locked. I was walking back to my cottage when I saw the door to the Frankenstein tomb open, the chain split in two and lying on the cold soil. I raised my lantern. "Hello!" I cried into the night, gripping my spade tightly. In a groan that was as low and as lonely as the wind, a voice replied, "Go away." Thinking this a friend of the recently departed Frankensteins, I ventured closer to the tomb. Its peaked roof loomed above me and blocked out the light of the moon. I have been doing this job for more years than I can count, and Journal, I can say with conviction that I have never before been afraid to enter a tomb before this night. I shined my lantern into the stagnant darkness, and my light fell upon the back of a man who was a great and imposing figure, made more so by his need to crouch to avoid the tall, slanted ceiling. I took a look at the man and a look at my old spade, and I pitched it aside. The clatter of the falling spade made the man turn, and my light fell upon his hooded face. He had the remnants of great injury to his features. Great stitches had once held him together, and I wondered if he had been in the recent troubles to the north. He looked as if he might hold a cannon against his mighty chest, and fire it by sheer will alone. But then, looking closer, I saw the unmistakable countenance of misery. And as my light fell upon him and onto the stone slab, I saw the charred and rotting remains of a man, laid out with care, his arms forced into a repose of eternal rest. "Sir," I said, finding my voice at last, "you cannot simply break into a tomb and leave a body behind, I'm afraid. This is the Frankenstein's family tomb." The man looked at me in the eye for the first time, and I saw the ghost of anger there, just for a moment, and then it was gone. "This is Victor Frankenstein," he replied, quietly. "He is all that is left of the family Frankenstein." He sighed deeply and looked back at the corpse. "I see." I dug into my old, oiled greatcoat's pocket and brought forth every gravekeeper's best friend, a small bottle of spirits, strong as the fires of hell. I uncorked the bottle and passed it silently to my companion. He looked down to the bottle, then over to me, as if weighing my intentions. He then took the bottle and drank a great quantity. He seemed to stop drinking as a thought struck him, and passed the bottle back to me. I took a sip and corked the now empty bottle, returning it to my greatcoat. The man spoke. "The last time he and I stood here, he had sworn vengeance upon me. He had sworn to pursue me, sworn revenge for the life I had ravaged. He wished for me to drink deep of agony and of despair, and I think, finally, he has his wish. For without him I have no purpose. Without him I have nothing for which to strive. I am as empty as his cold, lifeless heart. Not knowing what to say, I cleared my throat and ventured, "Was he a good man?" He bent low and brushed the faded hair away from the corpse's face. "He was a great man of science, a great man of study and of books. But was he a good man?" He closed his eyes and then shook his head. "No, he was not a good man. And yet I mourn him, as a son does a father, and as a mortal a fallen god, I mourn him. And that is enough." And then he knelt next to the body and placed a tender kiss upon its lips. And though it may have been the wind, I swear I heard him whisper, "I am sorry, Father." He then stood and turned to me, his cheeks moist, but his face as solid and cold as the stone that surrounded us, and I admit I was again afraid. "Seal this place, gravekeeper. Close me in, and never again open this tomb upon the light of day. I beg of you." I could tell by the look in his eyes that he was in earnest, and yet something stirred within me. It was as if all the pity I could muster was suddenly reaching from my soul and resting upon this poor creature, who had, it seemed, seen his world collapse around him. I shook my head. "I cannot do as you ask," I said. Again the ghost of anger threatened to bloom upon the man's face, but I continued, driven by fear as much as by purpose. "You said you mourn this man as if he were your father, as if he were your God. And it seems to me that I don't know of any father nor God who would want such a fate for their son." I risked everything and reached a hand up to his shoulder and rested it there. "I'm sorry, my friend. I will not cause your doom." The giant turned to look once again at the corpse, then glanced at my hand upon his shoulder. Finally, he looked down at me. "Friend?" he asked, as if tasting the word for the first time. He held my gaze as he seemed to debate something in his mind. Finally, he reached a decision. "Friend, then," he finished, and reached his great hand out to me. I gripped him by the wrist as best I could, and he closed his hand around my entire forearm like an eclipse of flesh. He released his grip and gently moved me aside, as if I were but a twig from a new branch in spring. As he reached the entrance of the tomb, he paused and spoke over his shoulder. "Thank you," he began, then seemed to hesitate. "Friend," he finished. He walked from the light of my lantern and into the cold darkness of the night. I returned to my cottage and finished my meal from the pot over the fire. I made myself a bowl, sat down, and began to work on these pages. I fear my meal has grown cold with the telling. All right, our final story for you. I had forgotten to change the image again. Oh well, might as well end as you started. So this was the Creature's Lament image. I do apologize for that. But our final story is this one. Aha. And it's titled Rust and Dust. The image is the arm of a scarecrow. The shirt sleeve is torn and ratty. The arm itself is made of an old bent tree branch. Its spindly fingers are tied on with bits of string and wire, ending in broken joints that look like claws. Dangling from the scarecrow's finger is a ring of old, rusted keys. The property had been abandoned for centuries. Stories and legends were still being told about the old place, how there must have been a murder in the now crumbling manor house, or how the cellars were littered with bodies of a long extinct family. One thing was for certain: nothing, not bird nor beast nor bug, would dare cross the fence line and into the fields. Hedra peered over an aged and crumbling wall, shielding her eyes from the autumn sun. The fields were a patchwork of gold and green, allowed to grow wild for the last few hundred years. At least, that's what the property manager had told her when she bought the place. She spotted the manor house in the middle of the property, still undamaged by the ravages of time, save for a partially collapsed roof. She wondered if any of the previous property managers had kept up on repairs. She hopped onto the short wall and was just stepping off the other side and onto the property when the wind suddenly picked up and blew something into her eyes. She landed heavily on her side and elbow on the ground. Cursing, she stood up. Her elbow throbbed and stung where the skin had torn. She turned and kicked the wall by way of revenge, then carried on toward the house. The walls of the house were all large stone blocks. It didn't match any of the quarry stone she had seen in town. She wondered if the stone were taken from the fields themselves and used for building, as the original owner had expanded the farm. There were windows all along the front of the house, filled with hand-poured glass. Shutters hung from several of them, though others had fallen off over time. It's really not that bad, she thought, taking it all in. She walked to the front door and tried the latch, but it was locked. The manager had warned her about that, and had recommended bringing a locksmith on her first visit, but to Hedra, that seemed too easy. She wanted to explore, to adventure on her new lands, and what better way to begin than by breaking into her new house? She walked around the building, picking her point of entry, wondering why none of the local kids had ever taken a rock to any of the windows. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a fairly easy climb along the large stones and windowsills up to the collapsed portion of the roof. She nodded to herself and started climbing. Her elbow protested the whole way up, and more than once forced her to find a better place to grip. But she made it to the top without harm, and dropped into the space below. She pulled a small flashlight from her pocket and shined it upon the room. Rain had gotten into this area of the house for who knows how long, but the covered portions seemed to still be in surprising shape. She walked along the rafters to a small staircase leading down in the far corner. She found herself in the kitchen. The air was musty and foul, the dust causing her to sneeze every now and then. No bodies or bloodstains so far, she thought, walking through the kitchen and into the hallway. The hallway led to some sort of parlor. The shelves were stripped bare. Whoever was last in here, either owner or thief, had taken everything from the room. She walked over to the window and opened it. She pushed on the shutters to open them as well, but they came apart and clattered to the ground. She breathed deeply in the fresh outdoor air, enjoying it all from being inside. In the distance, in the middle of the field, a figure stood. "Hello!" Hedra called out, but the figure didn't respond or turn around to face her. She climbed out of the window and marched through the long grass out to meet them. "Can I help you?" she asked as she approached. But the other person didn't stir. Hedra reached out and spun them around by the arm, then let out a short yelp. "A scarecrow," she said out loud to calm her nerves. "I'm talking to a scarecrow." She shook her head, but she had to admire the effort that went into its construction. It had clothing, a tweed shirt and jeans, legs, arms that hung over its sides. It even had fingers formed from old sticks and broken bones, lashed together with string. Hanging from its figures was a set of keys on a steel ring. Hedra laughed. Someone obviously had a sense of humor, she thought, picturing the original exchange as a drunken lark. She took the keys and went back to the manor house, this time unlocking and opening the front door. It was time to get to work. It was already late in the day. A month had gone by since she had been to the manor house, and she couldn't be happier with the repairs that had been done. The roof was fixed, the shutters patched and replaced, power was ran to the house, and lights installed, and the old wall that surrounded the property was repaired. She had movers bring her belongings and furniture from storage and into the house just last night, and tonight would be her very first stay at the house since she had bought it. She still had no real plumbing to speak of, but the water pump to the well was built into the kitchen, so at least she had indoor water. She cooked herself a simple dinner, unpacked a few boxes, put away what she could, and then, tired from the journey here and from her own excitement, she went to bed. She awoke and sat up in the darkness of her bedroom. There had been a sudden noise that woke her. She was sure of that, but now the house was eerily calm. She stood up and went to the window. The moonlight basked the fields below in a pale gloom bright enough to see by, but too dark to make out any details. Something was moving in the field. It appeared to be someone flailing around, spinning, dancing in a strange rhythm. Hedra put on a pair of pajamas against the evening's cold and went downstairs. A crash rang out from the kitchen. "You clumsy oaf!" a voice said in self-depreciating tones, not even pretending to hide their presence. "His lordship will have my hide for sure." Hedra opened the kitchen door from the stairs and turned on a light. There were several broken dishes lying on the floor, still rocking back and forth on jagged edges, but there was no one else in the room. Hedra took a deep breath, then jumped from the sound of a harpsichord as it filled the air. It seemed to be coming from the parlor. She grabbed a large kitchen knife and slowly made her way toward the tune. She stood in the hallway and pressed her ear to the door of the parlor. She heard the murmur of a room full of people, voices coming and going, gossip being spread. And through it all, the harpsichord played. "More wine!" called a gruff, drunken voice somewhere in the room. "Right away, sir," someone replied. Footsteps were crossing the room, headed toward Hedra. They stopped in front of the door. The latch moved, and the door slowly creaked open. Hedra peered into the room, empty except for her boxed-up possessions. "How did you get into my house?" Hedra turned around. There, standing at the foot of the main staircase, was a man in an old-fashioned military uniform. His hand rested on the hilt of his saber, which shined in the moonlight. I'm waiting, the man said. Your house? Hedra said, stunned, gripping her kitchen knife tightly. The man stomped his boot in a sudden tantrum. I am Lord Alfred, and you are in my house. I demand to know why you are here. Hedra thought for a moment. Lord Alfred? But you're dead. Lord Alfred walked toward her, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. When he was only a few paces away, he smiled. Why would that make any difference? He said, drawing and raising his saber. Hedra ducked through the door into the parlor and locked it behind her. The room vibrated with the echo of laughter, and then the sound was gone. The sun shone through the window, illuminating a pleasant sitting room and the numerous books that lined the shelves. A man in a black butler's uniform was busy dusting the shelves. He turned, saw Hedra, and deflated. Oh, no, he said. You can't be here. If you're here, then Lord Alfred will have gone. And if he's gone, then... The butler ran to the window and peered out into the field. Hedra fancied that she could see the color drain from his face. He turned to her. You shouldn't have come. Hedra stood in darkness once again. The books, the butler, and the chairs had all vanished, replaced by her own furniture and boxes. She stood still for several minutes, catching her breath. Then she took a firm grip of the kitchen knife and went out of the parlor once again. Lord Alfred was no longer around, and she let out a sigh of relief. She walked to the window and looked out on the field. The scarecrow was there, stuck to its pole, but whatever had been dancing in the field was gone. Hedra wondered if he ever existed at all. The scarecrow turned its head to look directly at Hedra, standing in the window. Hedra gasped and watched as the lifeless construct pulled itself free of the stake that held it in place and slowly started to walk toward the house in jerking, flailing movements. You should have listened and left while you still could, a voice said from behind her. She turned and saw the butler standing there. He looked disappointed. I really don't understand you people. We throw you off of walls, we collapse part of the building, we even lock the doors and throw away the key, but somehow, every so often, someone comes along. What are you talking about? Hedra asked. You come here, you break in, you rebuild, and for what? Is this the only ruin in the world these days? Are there no other houses available that you had to pick this one? I don't understand. All I did was buy the property and move in. The butler chuckled. Nobody can buy this property. The owner is still here, and he's not inclined to sell. You mean Lord Alfred? Hedra asked. The butler smiled, sadly. No. Lord Alfred didn't own this land any more than you do. He's just gone mad over time. He was raised as a baron, you see. He isn't used to not getting his way, and to lose out to that? To be kept here against his will? The embarrassment must have broken him. To lose to what? To the owner. The butler moved to the window, watching the figure's halting approach. The scarecrow. How can the scarecrow be the owner? The butler laughed. There's no time, he said, then turned to Hedra once again. If he catches you, you'll be stuck here with the rest of us. Under his breath, he added, at least I'll have someone else to talk to. Hedra glared at the butler. I have no intention of being stuck here with you forever, she said, looking at the Scarecrow's progress. It was very close now. How do you stop it? Lord Alfred laughed from the top of the stairs. The butler rolled his eyes. You don't stop it, idiot girl, Lord Alfred shouted. You get stopped by it. That scarecrow is older than the house. You may as well attempt to stop the wind. The scarecrow reached the door. It started pounding, shaking the wall. Hedra ran upstairs to the bedroom, just as the door burst inward. The scarecrow followed. Hedra closed and locked the door with the house keys. Then she pushed the bed against it. The top half of the door exploded in a hail of splinters. The scarecrow peered in at Hedra, its blank, lifeless expression piercing her soul like shards of ice. She swiped at the scarecrow with the kitchen knife, but it didn't even try to avoid the strikes. She plunged the blade into its chest, and the scarecrow backhanded her further into the room. Hedra landed heavily. When she got back to her feet, the scarecrow was already through the broken door. It corralled her toward the corner, never letting her dive to one side or the other. Hedra swung the house keys at it, using the heavy metal as a weapon. When she could retreat no further, her back pressed into the corner, the scarecrow reached for her. In desperation, she threw the keys at it. It was simple luck that the key ring looped around the scarecrow's outstretched hand. The creature paused, holding perfectly still for several seconds before straightening out, turning around, and crawling back through the ruined door. Hedra followed at a distance. The butler and Lord Alfred looked at the scarecrow as it passed them, then back to Hedra. What did you do? Asked Lord Alfred. Hedra shrugged and followed the scarecrow out the door. She stepped out into daylight. The house behind her was gone. The stone property wall was new, the stones all freshly cut and mortared. A gate was just being installed. An important-looking man strung a single key onto a steel ring and dangled it from the scarecrow's hand. Guard it well, the man said, and turned away. Then the house was built, and another man was adding a key to the ring that hung from the scarecrow's hand. The wall nearby had aged, but still stood strong and proud. Then Lord Alfred appeared. The house was larger now, but the wall had begun to fall to ruin already. Lord Alfred had a third key to the ring. Then he hung the ring from his own belt. The scarecrow's head turned to stare at Lord Alfred as he walked away. Hedra stood in her pajamas in the cool moonlight of autumn, staring at an ancient scarecrow who watched the entry gate like a sentry. She thought she understood now. When she went back inside, Lord Alfred and the butler were gone. But she hadn't really expected them to wait for her. She was sure she would be seeing them again, from time to time. She went upstairs, cleared the wood fragments from her bed as best she could, and slept peacefully, knowing she had a powerful creature watching over her. Alright, and with that finishes Tales in Sombre's Tones. As we wrap up, I'd just like to say that these live shows have really meant the world to me. Personally, I haven't been doing overly well, and these shows gave me something to look forward to. and oftentimes there wasn't much else keeping me going. I would also like to say thank you to Mark and Shula for their excellent interpreting skills and for helping make this possible. And to Karen for helping to keep me at least a little sane while doing all of this, and for doing a metric ton of work in the background. Karen and I would also like to thank you all for watching and helping to support the show. We've had some amazing support from everyone tuning in, and some great organizations such as the RNIB, Noisy Vision, and the Arts Council England that had made a load of difference in how the show turned out. If anyone knows of any other groups that might be interested in working with us, we'd be happy to hear from them. This isn't the end of the project, by the way. We fully intend to continue in a more physical format when it's safe to do so. So please check out the project website below if you're interested in keeping up. And thank you all once again. Try to stay safe the best you can, as difficult as that can be these days. I'm Sean Walter, and this has been Tales in Somber Tones.